I hereby call the Conference Committee on House File 2431 to order. Members of the Conference Committee, members of the public, we are back at it with a second offer from the House. As we have as our common theme on this Conference Committee, we're here because we really believe in transparency, and we want all of our offers and the discussion to be open to the public, and we want to make sure that the public has every opportunity to add their input as well for our consideration as we continue to negotiate this bill. So without further ado, I will kick it over to Mr. Savory to read through the spreadsheet.
Chair and members, kind of given the hour and the various other walkthroughs, I'll try to highlight just the changes from offer 1 to offer 2 to try to get this expediently as we can. Starting with on line number 4, state grant program, the House is now appropriating $51,958,000 above base in 26-27 and $36,302,000 in the tails. And I think there are no other changes to the Office of Higher Ed for appropriations. We'll move down to the transfer section, starting on line number 29. And the change for the House here is on line 31, which is the dual turning grants for legal cannabis employers. And the House is increasing its reduction to $1.5 million in each biennium, so $750,000 of savings in each year. And then, Chair members, that wraps up transfers. We'll go to Minnesota State. We'll just highlight that the House on line 41 does not agree, again, to the menstrual products roll-up to the rider consolidation, that piece there. Additionally, the House is adding an appropriation on line 43 to align with the Senate for the ERTC PFAS remediation at Lake Superior College. It's $500,000 one time. And then, Chair and members, a change on line 46 is a carve-out only of $500,000 only in FY27 on a one-time basis for the work development scholarships law enforcement specification. And then also line 47 adopting the Kids on Campus initiative cancellation in FY25. And then on Chair and members on line 49 starts the U of M, and they'll see O&M rider consolidation for the Morris tuition waivers. The House is moving to that position, so a net change of 0, but a $500,000 positive and negative that would cancel out from a mathematical standpoint. And then there's a variety of reductions that the House is now moving to, starting on line 55, which is $1,408,000 of savings for 26 and 27, and $1,408,000 of savings for 26 and 27 for the Research and Innovation Office at the U. Line 56, a reduction for economic development research of $58,000 in both bienniums. And then line 58, a reduction to the Humphrey Forum of $184,000 in both bienniums. And then also a reduction of $588,000 in 26 and 27 for the Talented Youth Mathematics program. The House has also changed its reduction on line 61 for cannabis research, now reducing the appropriation by $1.5 million in 26 and 27 and the identical amount in the tail, so $750 in savings each fiscal year. And then the House position remains the same on those items from 62 to line 65. And then also, as a part of contrast, just on line 68, the House is staying with its reductions to Mayo Clinic as previously offered. And then, Chair and members, one change, or state grant parameter changes, starting on line 79, line 81, the House is increasing its tuition cap to 2% per fiscal year, and the savings on that is projected to be $12,293,000 in savings. And then, Chair members, that wraps up. Chair members, that wraps up the offer for the House.
Thank you very much, Mr. Savory. Next, I will kick it over to Mr. Hopkins to read through the policy changes. Mr. Hopkins.
Mr. Chair and members, similarly, I'm just going to be highlighting the items that are still open and have not yet been agreed to. Reading from the House Offer 2 document, at the very top, R1 to R2 for state grants, the House has increased its proposal for the 4-year tuition cap to a 2% annual increase. The 3 items at the bottom of this page are all really spreadsheet items. The House has not agreed to them. Moving on to page 2, the 3rd line down, the Min-State Section Organization. The House accepts the Senate format, but is not going to be proposes not to roll up the menstrual product appropriation. For the University of Minnesota, the House has agreed to accept the Senate organization for this section, but it wants to pull out the cannabis research appropriation per the spreadsheet and put all the funding to the Center for Cannabis Research in the School of Public Health. It also does not want to roll up the menstrual products appropriation within the University of Minnesota section. Moving to page 3, the last item in the Article 2 section is again a spreadsheet item that the House has not agreed to. Moving on to Article 2 on page 3, the House has not agreed to include the direct admissions Senate-only provision. On page 4, the top line, the campus sexual misconduct policy, the House proposes the House language as amended by the A18 amendment that was handed out to members. The A18 amendment pulls into the House language a number of Senate-only language provisions from their campus sexual misconduct policy section. At the bottom of page 4, the College Financing Literacy Act, the House is not including that in its offer. Moving to page 5, the top line, the assigned family responsibility for state grants, the House continues to propose the House language in its offer. At the bottom line, the Senate-only provision regarding state grants, insufficient appropriation. The House proposes to accept this language, except for the last sentence that is at Senate line 48.18 to 19. That's the sentence that limits the commissioner's ability to reduce awards by any other means than the ones listed in that paragraph. So the House proposes to accept the Senate language except for that final sentence. Moving to page 6, the Senate-only provision regarding surplus appropriations for the state grant program. The House agrees to accept the Senate language with the limitation in the Senate's previous offer that it is limited to the changes in paragraph A only. And the House proposes to allow AFR adjustments in the case of a surplus appropriation to recognize negative parental contributions and student contributions, but with a floor of negative $750. And Mr. Chair, that is the last open item in this document.
Thank you for that, Mr. Hopkins. I recognize Mr. Savory.
And Chair and members, just a point of clarification, I neglected to mention on line 83 of the spreadsheet, the House is moving to the application deadline to the 30th day of the academic term in alignment with the Senate for a savings of approximately $4.1 million.
Thank you for that, Mr. Savory. Member discussion. I recognize Chair Fateh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I have a question for Commissioner Olson, if you can come up, please.
Commissioner Olson, if you would please head to the testifiers table. We have a question for you.
It's around the A18 amendment, if you have that with you, Commissioner.
All right, Chair Fateh, please proceed with your question.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair and Commissioner. In reviewing the A18 amendment, do you believe it conforms with OP's recommendations?
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chair Fateh, For the tape, Dennis Olson served as the Commissioner of the Minnesota Office of Higher Education. Chair Fateh, to your question, yes, the A18 is absolutely friendly. This adopts the House language and incorporates Senate language, so appreciate the action here.
Thank you, Commissioner. Chair Fateh, anything further? All right, is there any other member questions?
I have other comments and questions, but no longer for Commissioner. Thank you so much for that help.
Commissioner, you're off the hook for now. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, Chair Fateh, please proceed with your next question.
We can call it Bernie. No, don't say that. I want to. I know. I appreciate the walkthrough, and I appreciate you guys coming back with a little more movement on both the policy and on the spreadsheet. So I appreciate the work you all are putting into this. I know I mentioned this a few times already, but I want to also just continue to talk about the negative SAI parameters. And we asked OHE to give us some numbers around that. I think Sam is passing it out right now, if it's not already in your packets. I know we all share the same goal of spreading around the pain, but my concern is that by just resetting the lever to 0, that we're targeting, well, I don't want to use the word targeting, but the burden is being placed on some of our most poorest students and the students that need help the most. So I had a couple questions for folks in the audience if I can call up, but I'll wait for Sam also to continue to pass out.
Chair Fateh, I think if you would identify who you have a question for, they can make their way to the testifier table while Sam makes his way around the committee table.
Yeah,
Chair
thank you.
Fateh.
Yeah, is Meredith available? Is Meredith available in the crowd? There, yep.
Chair Fateh, please proceed with your question.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much, Meredith. Can you explain to us why recoding the negative SAI to 0 would have a disproportionate impact on a smaller cohort, a smaller group of students?
Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Chair Fateh. For the record, my name is Meredith Fergus. I am the Financial Aid Analyst in the Office of Undergraduate Education at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. And so I'll actually just let you know that this is an issue Mr. Holling from Min State and I have discussed repeatedly over this session. The worry we have about the negative SAI recoding is its disparate impact by income. Because it does impact students with a negative SAI, it essentially is concentrating that $87 million reduction on the students whose income is less than $28,000 a year. There are only 20% of state grant recipients in that bucket. And so by concentrating a cut of $87 million on that 20% of recipients, you are essentially causing them to have a reduction of more than $1,000 per student. And while we may believe that by changing the other parameters and kind of making adjustments, in no way do those other parameters offset that $87 million reduction that is concentrated on those students, because those other parameters spread increases across all other students. So I did ask the Office of Higher Education if they had a spreadsheet that would show the impact by income. And if you look at the spreadsheet that I think Sam received from OHE, or that the committee received from the Office of Higher Ed, I'm looking at the page titled Fiscal Year 26 State Grant Spending Simulation. If you look at the impact by comparing the reductions by the incomes that go down, you can see that the lowest group of students, those with an income less than $20,000, would have an $800 reduction on average. And when I say on average, it's taking into account full-time, part-time status. It's taking into account a number of other factors that also come into play. So it's actually underestimating the reduction for full-time students. Full-time students will see a reduction larger than that $800. And then if you proceed to the bottom, you can see the highest income state grant recipients, those at $100,000 or more. Well, actually, those at $60,000 or more, their reduction is less than $100. So we are creating a huge reduction for the lowest income students and almost no reduction for middle income students. That is what we're trying to avoid by not recoding the negative SAI.
Chair Fateh.
Thank you so much, almost a Senator Wolgamott, Chair Wolgamott. And thank you for that explanation. That was extremely helpful. Looking at the chart that was provided, would a full-time student that is making less than $20,000 annually, would they see a 10% or more, a cut that's equivalent to 10% or more of their income?
Yes.
Ms. Fergus.
Mr. Chair, for a student who is full-time, they would see a full $1,500 reduction. And in order to get that negative SAI, their income is likely only $15,000 to $20,000 a year. So the reduction in state grant is equivalent to 10% of their annual income.
Chair Fateh.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for that. I have other questions for other members, but I can pass it off to other members first.
Okay, further discussion. Recognize Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. A couple questions for the testifier, if that's okay.
Please proceed, Senator Duckworth.
I appreciate that. Could you remind us at what income threshold and below? Well, first I should ask this question. Is the income on this sheet that we're looking at the income of the student or the income of the student's family that this financial aid is dependent upon, or whose income exactly are we looking at? Or is it either or depending upon the situation?
Ms. Fergus.
Mr. Chair and Senator Duckworth, if OHE is using the code that I believe they are, the income is actually a family income, which means that it's the parent income only if it's a dependent student, and it is the student and/or spouse if they're an independent student.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And then just for context, could you remind us what the income cap is for the North Star Promise, meaning if a family makes an income of blank or below, their student qualifies for 100% tuition paid for by the state of Minnesota at a state institution?
Ms. Fergus.
Mr. Chair, Senator Duckworth, the North Star Promise eligibility goes up to $80,000 a year, assuming that their tuition and fees is not covered by other grant aid.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, I appreciate it. And would it be fair of me to assume or guess that when I look at some of the average state grant awards and I see what appear to be a little bit smaller amounts at the lower end of the family income spectrum and a little bit of the higher amounts at the upper end of that, some of that has to do with or account for the fact that those students or families that earn less typically receive more aid from the federal government? Would that be a correct assumption?
Ms. Fergus.
Mr. Chair, Senator Duckworth, yes. So the maximum state grant is essentially a maximum Pell Plus rate, and it is equal to 50% of the cost of attendance in a normal year, no rationing included. And so, yes, that 50% would subtract out Pell Grant, and then the remainder would be state grant. These numbers, however, are averages, which means that you're including some awards to students who are part-time and maybe only receiving 50% of a full-time state grant award, as well as those that may be full-time.
If I may, Mr. Chair.
Senator Duckworth.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Obviously, this stuff is figured out by folks far smarter than I am. But when I look at it, I assume there are reasons for the differing awards or amounts based on income thresholds and levels, not to mention the fact that a student or their family qualifies for 100% tuition paid for by the generous taxpayers of the state of Minnesota if their income is below $80,000. So I think if we're looking at trying to compare apples to apples, or if we're saying that one group of students is disproportionately impacted by this suggested change, I'm not quite sure I buy that. I think that there are other offsets and other things that I would take into consideration if we're looking at trying to free up some money given targets and trying to help the state grant. So I find this to be very helpful. But I don't necessarily think it's disproportionately impacting a certain subset of students. As a matter of fact, I think there's a certain subset of students that have a pretty good generous offer from the state of Minnesota due to some of the work you've done in past years, especially if their families earn less than $80,000 and they plan on attending a state institution. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Duckworth. Members, are there any further questions for Ms. Fergus? Chair Rarick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm very confused. We had testimony a few days ago that said that 40% of the grant recipients had the negative 1,500 SAI. Now you're saying only that it's 20% that bear this. And so I'm very confused by that. And I would point out too that this is the first year that this has ever happened and that this has ever been done. So part of the reason that the state grant itself is in such trouble, the reason we're looking at $239 million projected hole is this parameter, $87.7 million. So this is something we've never done before. This is brand new. And to talk about it, characterize it this way is a little disingenuous because they've never received this before. The numbers that you were giving were not accurate compared to what OHE had told us earlier. And again, this just started in 25. So I have a really hard time reconciling your testimony with what I've heard just a day or two ago. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Chair Rarick. Ms. Fergus, if you'd like to respond.
Mr. Chair, Chair Rarick, I too was confused by the 45%, so I actually went back to the state grant projections report that OHE published in February. And on page 7 of that report, it states that the 45% are students who have a 0 SAI or lower. So the 45% actually includes those with a 0. When you take out those without, that actually have a true negative SAI, the percent is only about half of that, which is why I cited the 20%.
Chair Rarick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, that was discussed. It was 45%, 0 or less. And it was very clear in the testimony that 40% were all the way down to the 1,500 SAI. So I'm not sure. Again, I'm very confused because it gets completely counter to the testimony we've already received. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Chair Rarick. Response, Ms. Fergus.
Chair Wolgamott and Chair Rarick, it is true, we probably would benefit from some clarification on that. The one thing I would add, though, is that I guess in 20 years of working in financial aid, the state policy has always been to protect the lowest income students because they are the most needy, especially when it comes to us discussing issues of affordability in higher education. These students did receive the benefit of that negative 1,500 SAI. And in fact, every college included a negative 1,500 SAI when estimating those financial aid awards for next year, because that was the parameters OHE released. So if we are to recode the negative SAI, we are essentially going to be notifying students with less than 2 months' notice that they are going to lose $1,500 for next year. And so while I definitely understand that the negative 1,500 is a recent federal change, it was one that we welcomed at the time, but also we feel that it places our vulnerable students in an even more vulnerable position by taking away these funds for next year.
Anything further, Chair Rarick?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, sure, if we had still had an $18 billion surplus and hadn't spent it into oblivion and didn't raise taxes by $10 billion more and we're not staring down a $6 billion deficit, I might consider this, but this is a really, really tough thing to do. It's a very, very expensive $87.7 million cost to the state grant program that just started this year. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Chair Rarick. Chair Fateh.
Thank you, Chair Wolgamott, and thank you, Ms. Fergus. I want to touch a little bit and ask a question about some of the stuff that was asked about from Senator Duckworth, who asked really good questions. And that's around some of the North Star Promise interaction and around this also. My understanding is the North Star Promise only covers tuition and fees. Can you speak a little bit about how this could help or impact negatively if we remove some of the full cost of attendance things for students?
Ms. Fergus.
Mr. Chair, so when North Star Promise was actually established, one of the things that made it actually doable was the fact that Pell Plus State Grant was already covering 100% in tuition and fees for students at Minnesota State 2-year colleges up to $40,000 in income, and at Minnesota State 4-year colleges up to about $30,000 income. So those two programs formed the basis by which North Star Promise could actually interact. When you make reductions in the state grant program, for those students whose Pell and state grant is equal to or slightly above, and for example, Minnesota State 2 years, Pell plus state grant typically equals tuition and fees plus a remaining amount for books and supplies. That's kind of how this Pell and State grant worked together for Minnesota State 2 years. If you were to recode the negative SAI, students would lose that $1,500 they could be using to pay for books and supplies and other costs. And so it does negatively impact those students, even with North Star Promise being there, because they will never receive North Star Promise. They're already over that tuition and fee amount. And that is true at pretty much any institution whose tuition and fees are below the caps in the state grant program, or below the LME level. So if they have a tuition fees under about $13,000, they are likely, and they're a full Pell student, so a 0 or negative SAI, they're likely not receiving North Star Promise, and so the reductions in state grant will flow through to them and impact their ability to buy book supplies and other things. Yep.
Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. I want to make sure I understand what was just shared correctly. So first and foremost, correct me if I'm wrong, there is a North Star Plus program that students can utilize for additional expenses that they may incur beyond tuition and books. Am I correct in that?
Ms. Fergus.
Mr. Chair, Senator Duckworth, yes. There is a North Star Promise Plus program in statute and an award of 15% of the student's Pell Grant amount. So for a 0 SAI student, that amount would have been $1,100 this year. However, that Promise Plus OHE has already notified colleges will not be available for next year. So these lowest income students also will see a reduction of $1,100 from North Star Promise Plus.
If I may, Mr. Chair.
Senator Duckworth, you certainly may.
Thank you. I'm going to keep asking you because I think that's what I'm supposed to do. So thank you for that information. And correct me if I'm wrong in this regard as well. It's essentially my understanding that North Star Promise students are sort of held harmless. And here's what I mean by that. I agree in that designing the program in a way in which it exhausted all other forms of financial aid first before tapping into North Star Promise funds is a good thing. It stretches those funds even further. That being said, if for some reason there's a reduction in some of the federal funding or scholarships that those students would get, the North Star Promise kicks in, and if that bucket begins to get low, it actually dips into the state grant bucket to backfill and hold those students harmless, meaning they will get 100% of their tuition and fees covered. And if they also qualify for the Plus program, they'll receive aid in that regard as well. Or am I misunderstanding that incorrectly?
Ms. Fergus.
Mr. Chair, and I feel like I should call up Commissioner Olson to discuss this. So with North Star Promise and North Star Promise Plus, so the student's cost of attendance is calculated tuition fee, or cost of attendance at the institution for purposes of North Star Promise. The institution first takes into account the Pell Grant, then it takes into account the state grant, then it takes into account any other gift aid that is offered, aid that does not have to be repaid. And so that can include a Minnesota Indian Scholarship, that can include a FIG grant, that can include a number of things. After that, if the total amount is less than tuition and fees, then North Star Promise kicks in. And it only covers up to 100% of tuition and fees, which means the main recipients of North Star Promise are actually students in the $50,000 to $80,000 income bracket, not the students below $50,000. North Star Promise Plus is a special supplemental program that has the same eligibility at North Star Promise, but requires the student to be a Pell Grant recipient. And the North Star Promise Plus grant is equal to a percentage set by OHE of the student's Pell Grant. So this year it was 15%, which if the Pell Grant's $7,395, 15% was $1,109. Yes.
Mr. Chair, just one last.
Senator Duckworth.
I think if I guess I'm struggling to identify what the issue is regarding some of these students, because I think I just heard you essentially say that no matter the circumstance, if a student qualifies for the North Star program, their tuition and books will be covered 100%. And so I don't necessarily see how the adjustment that we're talking about harms those students. And so I appreciate your information and the ability for us to dig into it. I can certainly understand how, based on how much federal funding they receive, it obviously impacts how far our dollars are able to stretch from the state. But a change or a modification that's being discussed now doesn't seem to necessarily harm those particular students, because either way they're getting 100% of their tuition and books covered. That's all I've got, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Senator Duckworth, thank you. I recognize Senator Fateh.
Yeah, I'll make one quick comment before I pass it back to Ms. Fergus. So the North Star Promise, it doesn't cover books, it covers just tuition and fees. But also the North Star Promise Plus it's an ongoing program. It was a pilot program that went on until funds were completely exhausted. So it wasn't meant to go on. But I'll pass it off to Ms. Fergus.
Ms. Fergus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Senator Duckworth. Yes, if you are asking straight out if these students will still likely have 100% of tuition fees covered, my hope is that yes, the reductions you make will not be so great to the lowest income students that they will not have 100% of tuition fees covered, because under Minnesota State grants, we've covered 100% of tuition fees for students under $30,000, $40,000 for probably a decade now. The difference is for students who are at extremely low-cost institutions such as Minnesota State two-year colleges, state grant and Pell Grant go above that. For the last decade, they have not only covered 100% of tuition fees, but they've provided the students upwards of $1,000 to $2,000 to cover books, supplies, transportation expenses, and those other things. And that is something that is unique to students at Minnesota State receiving a Minnesota State grant. If you were to recode the negative SAI for those students who are impacted, they will no longer receive that extra $2,000 for books, supplies, and other expenses. It would drop to $500. That is still a reduction and a change in policy than we've seen over the past decade. That is where we have the most concern, because yes, even though tuition and fees are covered, we know tuition and fees aren't the only expense, and they're not necessarily even the greatest barrier expense to students who are struggling with childcare, transportation, food, and housing.
All right, thank you, Ms. Fergus. Senator Fateh.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Fergus, and thank you, Senator Duckworth, for those questions. Can I call up another person?
You certainly may, Chair Fateh. Who would you like to call up next?
Thank you, and I'm not kidding this time, but I'd like to call up Bernie Oman, please. This time it's for
We
real.
really mean it this time. Mr. Oman, if you would please make your way to the testifier table. Chair Fateh, please proceed with your question.
Thank you, Chair Wolgamott, and thank you, Mr. Oman, for coming up. There's questions earlier about some federal student aid, and I wanted to ask you that in testimony we heard a little bit about some proposals to change in federal aid, and I want you to, if you can, tell us a little bit more about how that would impact your students and how recoding the negative SAI to zero would interact with that.
Mr. Oman, please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Chair Wolgamott, my name is Bernie Ullman with Minnesota State Colleges and Universities. Chair Wolgamott, Chair Fateh, and Chair Rarick, let me address some of the federal issues first. In Congress, as we speak, the Budget Committee is taking another run at the reconciliation bill. That bill failed in committee this morning. The issues that caused the bill to go down have nothing to do with the concerns that we're trying to raise at that level. And I think this debate and discussion that's happening in here, just my opinion, is going to be very healthy going forward, because this committee is going to have to deal with the interplay of what the federal government may do with that bill and the state grant and the Pell Grant and the state grant and the North Star Promise. But essentially, there's a couple items that we're mostly concerned about. One is what's called risk sharing, and it sounds like a great idea, but when we're the open access system, so we start doing risk sharing, meaning that our campuses would be on the hook for delinquents in a federal student loan. Well, if you're running a campus in an area where you have very low-income counties, and you start taking a look at students and applicants, and you making decisions on whether you think they can repay the student loan, that's going to be a difficult road for not necessarily as much of our campuses, but the students that they're trying to serve. The other areas that we're really concerned about at the federal level has to do with adult learners. In the bill that's being discussed, Pell Grants wouldn't be available to students that would be on a more of a part-time basis. So we figure that that could be in the upwards of $10 million to those part-time students. Our part-time students are not just kind of one day getting up and thinking they're going to play video games or go to school. Our students are there because that's all that they can put on their plate because of many life circumstances. So that's concern certainly coming our way, and I think this committee will have to grapple with that next legislative session. You know, as far as the discussion that was just had in the committee, obviously, you know, going into deep state grant financial formulas is not something everybody in this room has followed during that conversation. But I will just say this from representing the open access institutions and the, you know, community and technical colleges. Obviously, that really defines who we are and the students that we serve. So as you're taking a look at all the different levers that you're pulling, you got a very difficult job no matter what lever you pull. And I think our place would be is, you know, encourage you to look at the most equitable way to pull those levers that, you know, is spread across as many students as possible. So that would be kind of the thought on the negative SAI and how that all would play for our campus. And just finally, thank you to the House members on the coming to an agreement on that Lake Superior piece. That is a nice lifeline for that campus and the important work. So thank you.
You're very welcome, Mr. Oman. Senator Fateh, anything further? Okay, thank you, Mr. Oman. Unless there's any further
Finally,
questions.
I'm probably the oldest curmudgeon in this room, and I would say this transparency thing is a lot of work.
Indeed it is, but as Chair Eric said, it is worth it. We do the people's work here. Okay, Senator Fateh, I think maybe you had some more people you wanted to bring up. Okay, are there any members of the public who wish to testify? Senator Duckworth.
I just want to make a quick comment, Mr. Chair. Although if I'm picking up what Bernie's putting down, I think he'd like to wrap up this evening. You know, as we look at the financial situation, not only that the state finds itself in, but what we're trying to hash out here in the world of higher education, at least in Minnesota, dealing with the constraints we have and the limited resources that we have. And as we look to the future, we have to, I think, ask ourselves, at what point, when we have stretched the finances of our state as far as we can, at what point do we draw clear lines in regard to what we're prioritizing in terms of how we're helping students and families? I think the easiest and obvious answer to that is tuition. As we heard before, we've got some students who we are not only meeting that obligation of, but we're going above and beyond that, above and beyond tuition and fees and maybe even books in some circumstance. And so if we are trying to find ways to pare down and stretch dollars further to help more students with tuition, I think we have to ask ourselves, at what point have we done right by a lot of these students in terms of fairness? And we say, we've helped you meet your tuition obligation, your fees obligation, and I am sorry for the bad news. I'll use the same word. I'll be the curmudgeon. We don't have the funds left over to pay above and beyond that. And we want you to succeed, we wish you well, but we also have countless other students here in the state that we need to help as well. So as we're looking at these levers and parameters, I would say keep that in mind. In my opinion, first priority, helping as many students as possible with tuition and fees. If we have a $19 billion surplus, we can do above and beyond that, great. If we don't, well, then we have to start prioritizing what aid is more important to how many students. That's all I've got, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public who wish to testify? Mr. Bruce, welcome to the Higher Education Conference Committee. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. For the record, my name is Devin Bruce. I am the Director of Legislative and Political Affairs for MAPE, the Minnesota Association of Professional Employees. Covers all state agencies, boards and commissions, including a lot of the grants administrators and academic professionals at Minnesota State. I just wanted to quickly testify on a provision that's being discussed in the offer, particularly R41, the treatment of appropriations. We would strongly encourage the committee relook at the provision on the grant withhold of 5% as opposed to the House position on 10%. Currently in 16B 90, let me pull it up really quick. 16B 9.98 subdivision 14 administrative costs. This is kind of the statewide standard for the administrative costs the agencies can withhold. First at 5% for direct appropriations in the legislative, and then 10% for competitively awarded grants. This was put into statute in 2023 to help give more guidance around some of the grant appropriations, which would go up and down depending on who was a chair, and create some standardization. In particular, the reason why the grants provision at 10% for competitively awarded grants is because they can become quite costly, particularly now with IT costs, having to hire contracts outside to develop the specs and multiple rounds of bids, which can get quite pricey. So we'd highly encourage that the committee adopt the House position of the 10%. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Bruce. Any questions? Senator Duckworth.
If I'm looking at what I think is correct, Mr. Chair, R41, essentially, it says this: the Senate allows for default retention by OHE of 5% of a competitive grant appropriation, while the House is at 10. The House allows OHE to carry forward certain unspent operating appropriations into the next biennium, and the Senate does not. So if I were to try to split the two, maybe you look at 5% and you allow the, you give some consideration to allowing the carryover that the House does. That might be a way to bridge that gap and find a little bit of a compromise. Not sure if the testifier has an opinion on that, but that seems like a way to maybe move that forward.
Mr. Bruce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Senator Duckworth. We don't have a specific position on the carry forward. That's usually, at least in this biennium, has been a proposition, particularly by MMB and the administration as well as OHE. They might be a better person to bring up here to talk about the carry forward and what the effect is that. But it is to more match what the governor's office as well as the legislature has on the administrative carry forwards of unspent appropriations to offset any unanticipated incursions. The grants withhold itself is specific to that grant and how it is administered, which also supports the position. The carry forward is kind of like a general amount.
Thank you, Mr. Bruce. Are there any other questions for Mr. Bruce? All right, thank you for your testimony. Are there any other members of the public who wish to testify on this offer? All right, seeing none, is there any further member discussion? Chair Rarick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So an interesting point was raised by Ms. Ferguson. I was wondering if he could come up and let us know why it is that North Star Promise Plus is no longer doing any more scholarships or grants.
Chair Rarick, I'm sure that OHE would be more than happy to come up and answer your question. Commissioner Olson, welcome back.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chair. Delighted to show up again. So just a little bit of brief history. In the original North Star Promise Act, the creation of North Star Promise Plus allowed the agencies to set the Plus Award at up to 50% of a Pell Award based on projections. We felt at the time that we were being fairly conservative with 15% to Ms. Fergus's testimony for North Star Promise Plus Award. Based on current projections and kind of follows similar discussion we've had with the state grant, we project North Star Promise Plus appropriations to come really close to available resources, or not appropriations, spending to come close to available resources. And so we're recommending 0 for the Plus program going forward, simply because we have to make a commitment to fund the base awards first.
Anything further, Chair Rarick?
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Olson. I appreciate that. It's another way to get at the negative SAI of 1,500, and, now there's no money there either. So I just thank you for letting us know that. I know it was just a 3-year program, kind of a pilot program, and it's being ended essentially after one because there isn't any more money. So I guess I would ask Senator Fateh if you had considerations of funding North Star Promise Plus. And technically it's one revenue account, but funding it enough to cover North Star Promise Plus, has that ever been a consideration that you've talked about in the Senate?
Chair Fateh.
Thank you, Chair Wolgamott. Thank you, Chair Rarick. We have not. It was just a pilot program that was temporary. Our hope was to extend it, but in committee this year, we did not do that.
Chair Rarick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, this is getting at exactly what your concern is of the negative 1,500 SAI. It is literally a program, I believe you were the chief author of North Star Promise and North Star Promise Plus with one revenue account. And I just find it curious that if that's such a high priority, that the North Star Promise Plus, that there wasn't a suggestion, or in your spreadsheets, you didn't put more money into North Star Promise to also fund North Star Promise Plus. It's just a curiosity of mine.
Chair Fateh.
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. I appreciate that. The North Star Promise and North Star Promise Plus only applied to the public institutions, not the private institutions. So the North Star Promise Plus wouldn't go to any of the private institutions.
Anything further, Chair Rarick?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Right, I understand that, and the negative SAI would go to all the grant recipients and all the different institutions. That being said, it's a program that you set up that you already had on the books and clearly is out of money after year one, not after year two, not after year three, but after year one, it's completely out of money. So it's just a curiosity of mine, and I'm just not quite sure why that policy was chosen in that way, where you're trying to do it through the state grant program with negative SAI of 1,500, but not funding North Star Promise, which would then fund North Star Promise Plus.
Chair Fateh.
Thank you so much. No, that's actually a very good question, and that was one of the reasons why we made it a pilot program, so we can see what the need was out there. And definitely, as the commissioner articulated, the need was great, and the funds were depleted. So hopefully, with some of the negative SAI and some of the other stuff we're working on, we can best help the students within the parameters that we're setting.
Anything further, Chair Rarick? Anything further for Commissioner Olson? All right, thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, is there any further member discussion regarding the most recent House offer? All right, seeing none, Senator Fateh, I have a hunch that I know the answer to this, but this is a good offer. You willing to accept it right here, right now?
I can't accept it without your St. Cloud buddy not being here. Unfortunately, he's absent.
Fair enough, fair enough. Okay, well, in that case, members of the committee, members of the committee and members of the public, in just a moment, I'm going to recess this committee and give the Senate conferees time to review the House offer and discuss it. And I know that Chair Rarick and I are ready to be here all night until we want to get our work done and get this bill settled. Chair Rarick.
We can't meet past midnight. Grace to us all.
Yes, tonight meaning until midnight, correct. Senator Fateh.
I'll have the offer ready 11:59.
All right, there being no further discussion, this committee is in recess.